What's going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here, and with me today I have New Horizons. No introductions needed. Say hello to the people.
What's up?
And today we're doing a bit of a versus matchup, a more interesting versus matchup. We have Team Talent versus Team Hard Work. I know you weren't ready for that fire title. We're going to be discussing if Naruto and Sasuke, along with Orochimaru and Jiraiya, mentor and students, ended up coming across each other, coming to blows, coming to blades. What would end up happening? Now, to be specific, this is going to be the Naruto that, developed the Rasen Shuriken and fought Kakuzu, as, to be honest, like, Naruto at the beginning of part 1 isn't that strong, being real here, against the Sasuke that was at the beginning of part 1, versus, Jiraiya with his Sage Mode against sick Orochimaru. So it's pretty interesting because, we got Orochimaru, who's like super sick. We got Sasuke, we got Naruto, we got Jiraiya. I just listed the characters again. It's going to be an interesting matchup. With that being said, make sure to like and subscribe if you're new here. Check out New Horizons below if you haven't already. He makes great stuff, phenomenal content. And with that being said, we'll get right into the video. So starting off, we were discussing before, the video, and even like, we're going to be discussing right now what the most likely scenario is here. Because we could sit here and we can grandstand what if this, what if that. But at the end of the day, I really want to talk about, the most likely scenario in this matchup. And what we kind of foresaw was that these groups of fighters would split up, and it would more likely than not turn into Naruto and Sasuke versing each other, along with Jiraiya and Orochimaru versing each other. Now, why might be the case? Well, do you want to tell the people, like, what's the deal with this? Why would this happen?
Yeah, we had talked about this, and we kind of thought or looked at like other fights in the series where it's like a team versus a team, and generally they split up into 1v1. So like, even when Jiraiya and Orochimaru had their showdown in part 1, Jiraiya said, okay, I'm going to take Orochimaru, and Shizune, you should take Kabuto. And I mean, there's like plenty of other examples in the series, like Taka at the 5 Kage Summit, where they basically just split up and go into one-on-ones. So most likely, yeah, I would definitely see it starting in a one-on-one, but it's still possible that they all work together.
Yeah, super likely scenario. And we're going to start off with Naruto versus Sasuke. Now, this Naruto, had undergone some, training. He developed the Rasen Shuriken, all this great stuff. But the question is, how did he surpass Sasuke at this point? In my opinion, not really. It's kind of hard to say because Naruto's strength at this point, right? We don't really have any measure of how much stronger he got from the point he fought Sasuke. All we know is that Sasuke was vastly superior to that Naruto. Even though Naruto was like suffering from the Nine Tails, taking over his body. The way the cinematography of this scene is like played out, Sasuke's above these characters. He's portrayed to be stronger. Naruto, in his mind, has to train to, catch up to Sasuke. And all he really gains is like Rasen Shuriken. There's no real way to measure like an increase in all his stats. Like there's no real way to measure that. He just fights Kakuzu with a bunch of clones. And the thing about the Rasen Shuriken, not only can he not throw it, and it's just not, it's hard to like imagine that like this one jutsu that is super flawed and doesn't even work the first time he uses it would really be able to tag Sasuke, because kind of like Orochimaru, he's super slippery, you know what I mean? So it's kind of hard to imagine that this one jutsu that Naruto developed would really make a difference against like Sasuke's established stats and arsenal, that being, his fire style, his Chidori variants, his summoning. What's your kind of little take on Sasuke versus Naruto, Horizons?
Yeah, Naruto's like in an interesting spot here because generally at the beginning of part 2, like he doesn't really do that much actually in terms of like trying to power scale him. The weird thing is that right after he learns the Rasen Shuriken, he kind of has this weird fight with Kakuzu where it's not like a normal fight where they progress to like their final stages. They just instantly try to kill each other in their top forms. And we do see that Kakuzu basically gets tricked once, but the jutsu fizzles out, and then immediately after, Kakuzu gets tricked again. I've always thought this is kind of weird, so I don't know if I can give full respect to Naruto for this.
Yeah.
But even so, like Sasuke and Orochimaru are some of the smartest characters in the series, especially tactically and counter strategy, while Kakuzu's probably more around average to above average intelligence. And with how short the jutsu lasts, it would be hard to see Naruto really deceiving Sasuke or Orochimaru and he'd have to use it like and when Jiraiya is trying to distract them or something. But enough about the Rasen Shuriken. Just generally, yeah, definitely narratively, Sasuke is definitely stronger than Naruto here. Even in their encounter, like, yeah, Naruto was not there emotionally, and he was recovering after going on his Four Tails rampage. But we do see, like, yeah, Sasuke's standing above Team 7, and he just embarrasses Sai and Yamato at the same time. So generally, overall, like, I would say Sasuke's on a different tier than Naruto. And I'm not saying, like, in their fight, like, Sasuke's just going to no-diff him, but
Yeah.
I can definitely easily see Sasuke beating him, and even more so. Usually Naruto has the more firepower than Sasuke if you compare their versions, but in this version, like, Kirin and Rasen Shuriken rival each other, so that really just shows where the two are at this point.
Yeah, they're kind of implied to be the two's like kind of ace jutsu in a way, and this isn't even to say, base Naruto's garbage, because he does have some good showings, like even, versus Pain. We're not gonna like count this because that's a little too far in the future, and he does undergo more training, so it really wouldn't be fair, but he's able to like swap hands with the Diva path for a short time, so it's not like he's complete garbage or anything like that. But to say, he's on the level of Sasuke, and this is not even like including his curse mark variations. It's hard to see, this Naruto really being able to, like, come on, do you really think Naruto's gonna attack Curse Mark 2 Sasuke with the Rasen Shuriken, which even if you gave Naruto the best like upscale and said, he's as fast as Curse Mark 2 stage Sasuke could just fly away. So it's like, it's really just not in the favor. He has much better jutsu. He has range jutsu. He has fire style, so like the Rasen Shuriken could backfire on Naruto even. So there's a whole number of factors, but generally, this Naruto does end up getting kind of defeated mid-diff. It's not really too much you can say in his defense. And I feel like that's just pretty clear based on the series. Like, Sasuke's more of an Akatsuki tier fighter, and Naruto doesn't really reach that level until he gets Sage Mode, in my opinion. That's kind of like my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and one more thing I'd like to add is that after Naruto uses the Rasen Shuriken, that's when Kakashi says, okay, you've surpassed me. But if he's just surpassing Kakashi, then there's no way he's on Sasuke's level,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah. And it's like, it's just not, it's not very, it's not very logical. It's really, and it's like, even the statements regarding Rasen Shuriken, like, it's surpassing the fourth Hokage, obviously hyperbole. That's been proven false. Like, no, fourth Hokage Minato is not like weaker than Rasen Shuriken Naruto. Come on, guys, But, so generally we see Sasuke coming out with the W mid-diff in this situation. There is the potential for the Nine Tails, but we're going to talk about that a little later, just to kind of keep going, Next up, we have Orochimaru versus Jiraiya. Now, these are the masters, you know what I'm saying? These are their senseis, their mentors. And generally, there's actually not too much to go off, weirdly enough, with these characters at this point. So, for example, in part 1, right, there's only a lot of lore we can go off in terms of Jiraiya and Orochimaru, that being, they're said to be rivals to one another or equals in strength. Orochimaru fighting Hiruzen isn't relevant because his jutsu is gone, and he has, a degrading host body. Jiraiya only really just kind of scares, quote unquote, right? Quote unquote, guys, scares away Itachi and Kisame. So it's kind of hard to see. Yeah, like, right? Like, whoa, man. So it's kind of hard to see this, like, Jiraiya and Orochimaru based on their, like, part 1 showings. Really, like, getting a gauge. It's just more of a lore argument where they're both just kind of shown to be relative. Do you have anything you want to add on, like, the part 1 stuff, like the lore, anything in their showings in part 1? Like, even their fight, they're both heavily, like, Orochimaru doesn't have jutsu and Jiraiya's roofied. Like, what's your stance on this?
It is strange that these two characters would be like, it's so difficult to compare them, and it's honestly too headcanon-y for my taste.
Yeah.
But like, we know that they are Sanin, so like they're supposed to be relative, but like Naruto and Sasuke are supposed to be rivals and all, but there's obviously points where there's a decent power gap between the two, so it is possible that there is one there. As for like the part 1 fight, there's really not much to gather because one person can't use his arms and the other is like drugged.
Yeah.
But there is like at the end of the fight where Orochimaru tries to kill Naruto, when Jiraiya tries to stop this, I think Orochimaru just like easily slams Jiraiya,
Yeah.
and like breaks one of his ribs. So I think that's kind of respect to Orochimaru there.
Yeah.
But really, in terms of just trying to get feats or statements, there's no heads or tails to make of it.
I agree. I agree. And even like from the part one stuff, it's like he doesn't have his jutsu and he's fighting Tsunade and roofied Jiraiya. So it's like it's kind of portrayed that Orochimaru is like still in control of the situation just because he's able to like, combat these two even with their summons. So, it's just, like it's a little goofy to be honest, but moving past the part one stuff, because it sounds weird, but like a lot of those factors like don't even apply right now. Jiraiya has a decent showing against Conan. He's able to like tag her with his like toad oil and like grab her, but again, like what is Conan really? Like, not to downplay Conan, right? But her one big showing is with insane amounts of prep and she still lost. Like it's just not, Conan's not that impressive. Do you have anything to add on that? Like Jiraiya's showing versus Conan, it's a good showing, but I don't think Conan's like this feat of like a fighter. Do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, you're definitely in dangerous territory right now. Like, you're definitely about to get a few comments about this.
Hey,
Like
man,
Conan fanboys.
it's just, look, she does her thing, but it's like, come on, you know what I'm saying? It's like, what does she do? But you know what I'm saying? I'll say, it's just what, like, the way I'll put it, if it was, it's just not, she doesn't impress me. It's like in her best showing, it's like she tries to blow herself up against Obito and she almost like kills herself. She's like super fatigued. So, it's just she's super inconsistent in my opinion. She's like Batman. Like, if you gave Batman prep against Superman, is it really that much of a feat for Batman? Come on. You know what I'm saying? So, what can you say on that? But moving past that, we also have Jiraiya and Orochimaru, who also kind of compare to Four Tails Naruto. Jiraiya having the lore of like one of the closest encounters he came to death being with Four Tails Naruto. I believe it's the most closest like he's came to dying. He has the big scar in his chest, and this is actually a weaker Naruto. They kind of portrayed a little bit more in the anime, like he has his part one clothing, so you could even imply like this is a weaker Four Tails than the one that Orochimaru fights. But he almost dies. You can maybe argue he was suppressed, but it doesn't change the fact that this Four Tails Naruto is still very threatening to this Jiraiya. Compared to Orochimaru, who's throwing ones with this Four Tails Naruto, you can make the argument, Four Tails Naruto was on the better end of that encounter. But Orochimaru did have a good showing against him. However, he was able to survive like the tailed beast bomb. He's able to like toss him across the forest with the grass longsword. It's there's quite a lot of quite a lot of good showings from Orochimaru. He literally just fights him, like he's just throwing digs with him. So there's generally a good comparison with the Four Tails as well there. What's your kind of take on like the whole them both combating Four Tails Naruto? Like, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because like we know almost nothing about what Jiraiya did. The difference is that Jiraiya is only aiming to suppress him while Orochimaru is trying to fight him.
Yeah.
So it's kind of tougher for Jiraiya because he was definitely trying to get in close and use that chakra repression tag.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is like a younger Naruto whose nine-tail seal is tighter, so it should make sense that QB chakra coming out would be weaker.
Yeah.
But even at the like, it's a lot of variability. But at the same time, like Jiraiya, when Jiraiya got hit by it, he didn't get cut in half and when Orochimaru fought him, he got cut straight in half.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Orochimaru had the ability to connect his torso, so really this is like one of our few things that kind of supports that like base Jiraiya and a base Orochimaru are probably very close in power.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it kind of shows that Jiraiya has more of the physicality side, while Orochimaru has more of the utility, considering that Orochimaru can connect his torso after being severed.
Yeah, he's very slippery. He's a slippery fighter. It's really hard to put him down. Even like the Orochimaru style substitution that like Sasuke was able to use against like Amaterasu is just super broken. He has such a lot of crazy ways to get out of jutsu, so it's just it's almost like it's hard to hit this guy, you know what I'm saying? Like hit him for real, so whereas Jiraiya, he's it's like he almost died, but he did take the attack. You could maybe say one, like it's kind of debatable what attack he took, but he did take an attack from Four Tails Naruto. That's all we know. We don't know really what it could have been. Maybe a smaller Bijou Bomb, who no real way to kind of talk about that. But this kind of goes into like they have like interesting lore, kind of goes into their jutsu versus one another. Jiraiya has some pretty good jutsu. You know, he has that swamp jutsu that's able to hold any of Orochimaru's summonings. He did this in their fight versus part one, so he could potentially do this to, you know, stun Orochimaru down. But, you know, the flip side of that is Orochimaru also has the grass longsword. You know, this grass longsword is pretty impressive. It actually wasn't able to pierce Four Tails Naruto. So if you want to get there, like, you know, it's pretty crazy. It was even like Enma, right, who is like regarded as the strongest summon, noted that the grass longsword would have it would have harmed his body, you know, even if it hit him. So it's just like it has a pretty good lore, and he has this really strong weapon that he can use in close range. He can also control it as well, which is pretty cool. But you know, there's a lot of stuff with that. Jiraiya has, you know, his Rasengan you know, variants, but at the end of the day, right, this is the question we have to ask ourselves. With like, does base Jiraiya have any jutsu that is really gonna, you know, overwhelm Orochimaru's regeneration or really take him down? What's your stance on like the jutsu scenario? Because in my opinion, Jiraiya, like his arsenal doesn't really like show anything that can like take down Orochimaru. Only really when he hits like Sage mode, and we're gonna talk about that in a sec. Is the possibility really there? What's your kind of take on their jutsu against one another?
Yeah, with Orochimaru and like those two regeneration things, really is like I said earlier, after his torso is cut in half, he just like reattaches it with snakes. And then the other is where like he regurgitates himself after losing an arm, and then he has like a perfect body. But he does this regurgitation thing like several times against his fight,
Yeah.
and against Naruto, and it seems like something that's not necessarily he can just spam, but he can definitely use it a lot, which is a problem for Jiraiya, because you make all this work to like get a finishing blow, and then Orochimaru just negates it.
Yeah.
So really, like, if he gets hit by a Rasengan, like, couldn't he just? I don't think that's just gonna like blow Orochimaru up, and instead he can just regenerate himself like he did when he lost an arm. So really, it's gonna be tough. Like, I do think that like that swamp jutsu you brought up, like even when he was repressed, it was able to think one of Orochimaru's smaller summons. So that could definitely be useful in general, and especially against like if Orochimaru uses Manda. But generally, like it's gonna be. I don't really see an avenue where Jiraiya can damage Orochimaru enough to the point he can't regenerate unless he goes into Sage mode.
Yeah, he like grabs him with his hair. Like, what is he? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is he really gonna do? You know? And to top it off, like, even if you make the argument, right? Like, this is how like much I'll give it to people. Even if you make the argument, right, that like Jiraiya's attacks like could somehow like be strong enough to take down Orochimaru. Orochimaru could just triple Rashomon it, where he summons like the three big like you know, Hashirama's like Rashomon gates. You know, he could summon 5 of them. He could summon that as well, which like. Come on, I'm gonna be honest. Are we really gonna see Jiraiya like breaking through 3 Rashomon gates in base form? It's a little outlandish, to be honest. Especially, you know, if they were able to somewhat I don't want to say somewhat tank, but like they were able to block the force enough of like Naruto's you know, tailed beast bomb. I mean, we know it was because like the land behind them was still intact. It was split sideways. So it's like, is Jiraiya and Base gonna produce something greater than Four Tails Naruto's tailed beast bomb? Probably not. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. So, you know, kind of, you know, and he's got his hair jutsu, like the hair senbon, but again, like Jiraiya's just not really, you know, not really showing anything too crazy on that front. And then, you know, anything you want to add to that? Yeah.
Just like to go off with that, like if four-tailed Naruto can hit him, can't really push Orochimaru to the point where he can't regenerate, something that I don't see base Jiraiya being able to.
Yeah. It's like, and if this Naruto was like getting killing blows on Orochimaru left and right, and Orochimaru was still standing by the end of the fight, and you know, he had his body pushed to its limits. And I guess this will be a good time to address like the whole like he's super sick, you know, super ill at this point. Horizons, you actually had a really good take on this. Do you want to like talk to people about like what your take was on like this sick Orochimaru? I actually really like what you talked about with this.
Yeah, when people bring up Orochimaru's fight with Four Tails Naruto, they're always like, "Oh yeah, he's super sick and his body is rejecting himself." But like in my opinion, he doesn't bring this up until like the very end of the fight, and he says, oh, this body is starting to show signs of rejection. So like this is like the very beginning of his sickness, which he doesn't even notice until he pushes himself like really hard. So really, I think like Orochimaru's probably like 95% or better here, and maybe his only problem is going the distance.
Yeah.
Like is his stamina going to be hurting? Is that what the problem is?
Yeah, which is like only apparent if he's fighting an opponent that can like really push him to that point. And even during the fight, he shows absolutely zero signs of that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not like Itachi in his fight with Sasuke where like he's visibly getting hindered by his illness. This is only shown like at the very end of their confrontation when like he's pulled out all the stops, you know, he's unleashed all this jutsu, and then he's like, dang, this body's starting to fight back, you know what I'm saying? So I definitely, I actually like that take quite a bit, and that's something that not too many people consider, because they'll like super be like Orochimaru's body, you know, like he's super big chat energy, but you know, it might not be that bad as people, you know, might think.
I mean, yeah, and like when Orochimaru was fighting in part one, like he was in against Jiraiya, like he was generally like he looked kind of distressed out there, but when he's fighting like Fords on Naruto, he's actually having like a pretty fun time.
Yeah, and you know, it's like he's enjoying himself. He's really, you know, against Jiraiya, he's like struggling and stuff like that. And you could just make the argument like it's kind of a time issue as well, like in terms of how when he needs to get his new host body. You could say like in part one he had a much shorter time frame than he did in part two. You know, there's a plethora of variables, but you know, just looking at the performance, he's having a good old time against, you know, Four Tails Naruto. So there's that. And then moving on, we also have Orochimaru's, you know, 8-headed Hydra form, you know, stated to be, you know, surpassing Orochimaru himself, which this is nutty, man. This is nutty stuff. Like he looks at Itachi's Susanoo. He's like, man, what is this? What is this gonna do to me? Zero fear. He has zero qualms about fighting it. He gets hit by the Totsuka blade, not knowing it actually was the Totsuka blade. And he's like, did you expect this puny attack to like really take me down? So it's like, he shows a lot of confidence actually in taking on Itachi. Now this is like dead Itachi, but you know, I do think it says something that like he sees this Susanoo and he's like, yeah, what is this to me? And it's like, okay, like we're gonna get to Sage Mode in a second, but like base Jiraiya is not really doing anything against the Hydra form, guys. Come on, it's just so it's so crazy. It's this giant summon. Even if like you want to argue like he brings in some of his own summons, what's your take on like if Jiraiya starts to summon like Gamabunta or some of the other like toad summons he has?
Yeah, and like also with the thing about the Hydra transformation is that this can be brought out whenever. Like I can see some people getting the misconception that he only was able to bring this out when he got out of Sasuke's curse mark, but when that happens, Itachi says, oh, I recognize this form, so it kind of supports the idea that he can turn into this when he wants, which is something that Jiraiya can't do with Sage Mode necessarily, because yes, you basically sacrifice his arms so it can be immobile so he can get into it.
Yeah.
But as for the summons things, like we forgot to bring up with in part one with their fight, we saw that Mondo was taking on Katsuyu and Gamabunta at the same time, and was basically, I mean, he was doing like really well, and he was actually like about to beat Gamabunta, but then Tsunade came in with Gamabunta's sword to beat him. But really, I think this Hydra transformation is supposed to be like a step above Manda, and this is like the ultimate form for Orochimaru. So I think that like, yeah, Jiraiya can use his summons, but he can't solely rely on them. Like, he'd be having to use his swamp jutsu, he'd be having to use multiple summons and his own jutsu. Jiraiya would definitely be having to throw everything at this.
Yeah, and it's just, it doesn't seem likely that he'd be able to take down the Hydra form if if he's not going to be able to take down Orochimaru himself, why would he be able to take down Orochimaru's like form that's, you know, meant to surpass his own power and be this ultimate form? It just doesn't make a lot of sense, you know? So it's just not too much, you know, really. Like for Sage Mode, you know, we're going to get into it, but Orochimaru's Hydra form just kind of clears. So generally, you know, Orochimaru does have a better showing against base Jiraiya. And even if you think like base Jiraiya is a little stronger than this Orochimaru, it's unlikely that this Jiraiya would be able to kill Orochimaru. And this matters in the matchup because we're going to move into the next segment, the most likely scenario on what we believe would happen. But we're going to move into it. Did you want to add anything else to that real quick? I'll cut this part out.
No, I think we can move on.
Yep. So in our opinion, I'm gonna speak for the both of us here. My fault. The most likely scenario here would be Sasuke beats Naruto. I mean, no duh, guys. Come on. And Orochimaru and Sasuke eventually fight Jiraiya. Now, the reason, it's a little, when Sasuke hops into the fight, right? At the very least, I'm of the opinion like Curse Mark II Sasuke, saying that Sasuke is above base Jiraiya. I'm of that opinion. I don't think like they're saying their relatives outlandish. I don't think it's that big of a leap in logic and based on their feats. At which case, it's gonna be impossible for Jiraiya to like enter Sage mode because he's dealing with two opponents now, and he's not gonna be depending on the environment, but we're assuming it's just kind of like a regular place. He's not gonna have this super specific like Rain Village corridor to run down, and it's just gonna be insane for him to take on a 2v1 of like these two fighters. And I foresee Sasuke taking down Naruto pretty quickly unless some circumstances happen that we'll talk about. So what's your general take on like if Orochimaru and Sasuke ended up like just teaming up on Jiraiya? I think they just kind of clean house, but what do you want to add to that?
I mean, yeah, because for starters, Orochimaru is very familiar on Sage Mode. Like that's what he made the curse mark out of. Yeah. So if he sees, and he probably knows Jiraiya is a Sage as well. So if he sees Jiraiya putting his hands together to go into Sage Mode, he's not going to let that happen. And basically, like any summon that Jiraiya uses is going to get defeated by Manda, and then you also have Sasuke there who can put pressure on him. But as for like
and summon Manda as well, in case Orochimaru can't, just add on to that. Continue.
Yeah, I guess Sasuke can do that as well. And then I guess like really if he can't go into Sage mode, and we already talked about base to base with Orochimaru, like if it's questionable that he can beat him, then it's also going to be questionable that like it's just going to be impossible if Sasuke is there. And this is like, in my opinion, I don't think Sasuke is on Jiraiya's level, because like even when Sasuke fought Orochimaru, he was instantly going into the curse mark, even though Orochimaru was like bedridden. Well, so I do think that Sasuke is like a tier below Jiraiya and Orochimaru. But when it comes to how fights work in Naruto, Orochimaru was counting on Kimimaro to be like his sidekick to help him beat Hiruzen and not get his hand sealed by the Reaper Death Seal. So I think that if that's how it works for Orochimaru versus Hiruzen, then that's how it's going to work here. Basically, Sasuke is like what pushes the needle over for Orochimaru.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's a phenomenal way you just said that. Great way of looking at it. I fully agree with that. And it's generally like that's really it. It's honestly the Kimimaro example is just so good. The nail that puts in the final nail in the coffin, as one would say. The little extra push Orochimaru needs. Now I think what's interesting is like we could talk about what for some reason, maybe Naruto like is able to stop stall Sasuke long enough, or for whatever, Jiraiya does enter Sage mode. I think it would also be pretty decently interesting. He's gonna have a lot of raw speed, so we could see him taking down Sasuke pretty quickly, as he did the I believe it's like the I forget which path of pain he it's the animal path, I believe.
The human, I think.
Human path.
Yeah.
I'll correct me if we're wrong. He's able to completely take it down instantly. Some people also think he was like mentally amped in that fight. I mean, that's fine, I guess, but he would still have like a super, big increase in his speed. And Sasuke would definitely get taken down very quickly if that was the case, because Sasuke's not beating Sage Mode Jiraiya. It's just not possible. And it's, maybe he could take a hit by blocking, or, if he's able to react to Jiraiya. But Jiraiya also has an insane arsenal right now. The giant Rasengan that can like cut down mountains and stuff like that. Take that as you will. He has like the sage oil with Ma and Pa, that would like burn up the battlefield, like saying, maybe Orochimaru fills up the battlefield with snakes. Jiraiya can clear with like the super burning hot water and, Toto oil. So there's a couple ways he would really do that. I foresee, Sasuke wouldn't last long if Jiraiya enters Sage mode. This kind of becomes more of a question of like, what would Sage mode Jiraiya do against like Curse Mark II Sasuke and Orochimaru? What's your thoughts on this, Horizons? Like, what's your kind of thoughts on like Sage mode Jiraiya against these fighters?
Yeah, it is interesting because if Jiraiya decides, let me take out the weak link, he definitely could, because Sage mode Jiraiya is just on a whole nother level compared to Sasuke. The thing with Sasuke though is that Like I'm not saying like because when the human path got hit, he got up, but
Yeah.
I think that actually blinded him for some reason.
It did,
Maybe
yeah. Like
not.
his like face was super
Yeah.
covered in like dirt and blood. So yeah.
Yeah. But as for Sasuke, like we've seen him use his curse mark, his wing to block C2 attacks from Datara, which were definitely packing some power as well. So I think if he were to react by using his curse mark to take the blow, like perhaps he takes a lot of damage from it, but it doesn't just take him out. Definitely in this scenario, Sasuke is going to be having to take a back seat. He's not going to be able to just go out there and fight Jiraiya straight up. He's going to be having to give backup to Orochimaru. And like I said earlier with like the Kimimaro stuff, like that's probably what Kimimaro would have been doing for Orochimaru if that had happened originally.
Yeah.
So really, I still do believe that like, yeah, if Orochimaru and Kimimaro are enough to beat Hiruzen, then Orochimaru and Sasuke is probably still enough to beat Sage Mode Jiraiya. I'm not gonna say outright, but that's where I lean.
I believe it's, you know, it's a contest, but I definitely think there's a possibility of it happening, especially, you know, comparing like Orochimaru's like Hydra form to Jiraiya's Sage Mode. You know, they're both, you know, these like limit, you know, not so stronger than themselves form. Like, and then what I mean by that is like Hydra Orochimaru is stronger than base Orochimaru, Sage Mode Jiraiya is stronger than base Jiraiya. So, you know, it's definitely like they have tiers of power above that. And you know, same thing with like Sasuke, you know, curse mark stage 2. So it's really tough. You know, in Sage Mode Jiraiya does have some, you know, possible win conditions we could talk about. For example, he has like that sound inducing genjutsu, but we've seen Sasuke break out of a plethora of different genjutsu in the Naruto series. For example, he's able to break out of the sound genjutsu by Kabuto in their fight. He's able to look Itachi in the eye and break through it. He's able to break out of C's light-induced genjutsu in the Kage Summit. He's also able to, well, I'm not going to bring up the Itachi example because some people still find that debatable to this day, which is perfectly fine. He's able to even like take over Orochimaru's own like universe inside of himself with this Sharingan. So to say Sasuke would like be, you know, taken out of this genjutsu would be like outlandish, and he would be able to free Orochimaru if Orochimaru was for some reason, you know, caught under it as well, because, you know, we've seen he's able to free Jugo from a genjutsu as well. So no real reason to say like Sage Mode Jiraiya's like arsenal would be crazy either. Maybe he like does some crazy move with like his Odama Rasengan and like eviscerates the both of them, like, or like, you know, it gets them out of the way, like there's nothing left. But, you know, generally it's going to be hard for him to reach that form in the first place, and even then, like, it's debatable like how well he would do in his Sage Mode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that like with Jiraiya, like I think that would force Orochimaru to definitely go into his Hydra transformation, because at this point, like Odama Rasengans and like a lot of his fire style jutsus are probably too much just to regenerate some. But if Orochimaru brings out the Hydra transformation, then I don't know if just Sage Mode Jiraiya by himself can necessarily beat Orochimaru in his Hydra transformation, especially if Sasuke is there, because Sasuke can combat with like, I don't know, his fire style. Even though it's weaker, it's gonna dampen it some. And then if Jiraiya starts to try to use his summons to help him, like Sasuke can definitely take those down with like Chidori spear, or at least occupy them.
Yeah.
So like I said earlier, it's still like it's definitely like, I think if it was just Sage Mode Jiraiya versus Hydra transformation, it's almost like 50-50, or I might even lean towards Jiraiya a little bit. But like with Sasuke there, he can kind of fight from the background and be that nuisance that just pushes the needle for Orochimaru again.
Yeah, and that Sasuke is super nutty. For example, it's in one of the earlier Naruto Shippuden movies. For example, there's this opponent who like starts going into the 8 inner gates, or his version of it, and Sasuke just blocks his chakra flow with Chidori Senbon. So Sasuke's nutty with the Chidori. Not to say like that's canon or anything like that, but they're, you know, he is going to be relevant in this fight. Like there's nothing to brush off, you know, whether that be he drops a Kirin on Jiraiya, you know, not to get too out there, like, and you know, we're gonna move on from this topic because like it's so unlikely that it's almost not worth talking about, but we are addressing it. So it just doesn't, you know, it seems like it seems a little out there for the Jiraiya side, but you know, it is possible if he reaches Sage Mode to maybe do something, but we more likely than not think, you know, Sasuke and Orochimaru would still take it. And then, so, we discussed earlier as well with Naruto, coming back to our friend. He got lost at the beginning of the video. Yeah, we're gonna go. Yeah, we're over here, buddy. Come back to us. And we're discussing the Nine Tails. We didn't bring it up, and the reason for this, and we could talk about how characters react to it as well. But the reason is Sasuke can suppress the Nine Tails, right? So it coming out is super, super unlikely. Honestly, at this point in the fight, there's no reason for Sasuke to let him power up. There's no reason it would be any different than, his original fight with Naruto, where he sees him powering up in the Nine Tails. He's seen the Nine Tails cloak. He's seen like what Naruto can do in that form, and that is not something he would necessarily want to tangle with, or even like risk combating, or like waste time or chakra even attempting to do. So it seems very unlikely that Naruto would begin to access the Nine Tails power. Same thing with Jiraiya's ceiling tag. That's also a possibility. Jiraiya himself could step in and attempt to stop the Nine Tails. So it's just very unlikely that this Naruto ends up going into the Nine Tails. Anything you want to add on that with this Naruto? Like it just doesn't really seem plausible that he'd be able to reach like and start powering up against like Sasuke and I guess Orochimaru.
Yeah, I mean, when this happened originally, Sasuke like immediately stopped the Nine Tails. That's not something he's ever really wanted to mess around with. In fact, he's kind of intimidated by it.
Yeah.
And then as for Jiraiya, like if it starts with like one or two tails, like Kakashi was able to use the chakra tag on one tail, so
Yeah.
Jiraiya could easily do that as well. And I definitely don't see Jiraiya just letting him rampage, because he knows what happens when that happens.
Yeah, super unlikely scenario. Even if you gave it to Naruto, we kind of discussed it. We kind of believe, like, even if you want to argue like Orochimaru's statement that like after he gets his arm ripped off by Three Tails Naruto, he's like, "Oh, you're not as strong as Sasuke." Some people use this as a legitimate feat. Some people think, it was simply there to goad, Naruto, which, but equally, take whichever interpretation you will. We generally believe, like, at the very least, he's around the 2 to 3 tail range. That it's debatable, but that's generally where we see. The main point being, though, that 4 Tails Naruto is firmly outside this Sasuke's range, and that Sasuke, again, like even going back to the grass longsword, it's unlikely Sasuke would be even able to damage this Naruto in the first place. So 4 Tails Naruto would obviously wipe this Sasuke. It would just be there's nothing for the Sasuke to do. Again, it would never get to this point, but there's nothing he could really do. In which case, like, 4 Tails Naruto kind of hops into the fight with Jiraiya and Orochimaru. And what's your kind of take on this like super fanfic scenario that we've painted? What's your kind of like discussion on that?
I mean, it's definitely worth talking about. It's definitely fun to talk about.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
I mean, if he goes even in the 3 tail state, like he took Orochimaru's arm.
Yeah.
So if there's somehow like a very unlikely scenario where somehow people get distracted and this just like suddenly happens, like even when he's in the 3 tail state, no one really wants to get close to him. But as for if he were to progress to the 4 tails, like, yeah, Orochimaru did fight him for a while and did fine. Kind of reached a stalemate status where he just like gave up. And of course, if Orochimaru was getting like torn apart by 4 tail Naruto, and that's like Sasuke has to get out of the way here. And the same for Jiraiya. Like this, we were actually talking about it some, like this would be interesting if somehow this gets really bad, then Jiraiya would decide like I can't get close enough to Naruto right now and risk getting taken out, so I'm gonna have to go into Sage mode while he's distracting them.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, if Jiraiya does suppress him, then Naruto will be passed out, because when Yamato suppressed him, Naruto passed out, and then that just goes back to what we were talking about with Sage mode Jiraiya versus Orochimaru and Sasuke.
Yeah.
As for if like Jiraiya can't suppress him, or no one can really suppress him, like there's nothing really stopping 4 tails Naruto here, considering Orochimaru can stop it. Perhaps Kirin can be used, but that might not even stop him, and plus he could counter it with a tailed beast bomb.
Yeah.
And even more so, like if time progresses, I'm pretty sure that Naruto would just get more and more tails, and then it would just keep going until Orochimaru or until really everyone is dead on the battlefield.
So that's, we discussed the matchup. Generally, the most consistent little, the most consistent line of thinking. Why we think this, with Sasuke beating Naruto, why that is. There's strengths compared to one another. Same thing with the Orochimaru and Jiraiya, and just discussing like the Nine Tails, how Sasuke shuts that down. Even the possibility of Sage Mode, which is unlikely, but we still discussed it regardless. Kind of their arsenals, like possible, win conditions and all that. So it's really just, it's interesting discussion, but at the end of the day, in this specific scenario, talent does beat hard work. These characters are just kind of like a bit stronger than the team hard work. So with that being said, make sure to check out New Horizons down below. Thank you for coming through for the video. My mic stopped recording him, but he said, you're welcome. Trust me, guys. He's laughing at that. But with that being said, you guys have a great day. Check out Horizons. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.